Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Drive Electric Florida's EV Myth Busting webinar. My name is Brooke Alexander-Goss, and I will be your moderator for today. On our panel today, we have Ali DySard, who is with the Senior Policy Specialist for the Environmental Defense Fund, Pete Westlake, who is Manager of New Products and Services with OUC, and Josh Cohen, Head of Policy with Switch. On this webinar, we are going to debunk common myths surrounding electric vehicles. Our expert panel will address misconceptions and provide a wide variety of information on various aspects of EV ownership, ensuring you have a clear understanding of the electric vehicle landscape. We will have some time at the end to address questions you may have, so please feel free to put those in the chat box, and we will get to as many of them as possible at the end of our presentation. There will also be a follow-up email sent post-webinar as well, which will include fact sheets from today's webinar and also a survey for you to complete, along with a recording of today's webinar for you to share with colleagues and friends. And now I will hand it over to Pete Westlake to begin.
Hi, folks. Thanks for attending on this subject. I want to start off by talking about AVs and the fact that they are actually here. So as the OUC has been interested in tracking state of Florida statistics since 2018, we get this information from the DMV for registrations. And as of January, and we expect that to go up again, as of January, there are almost 300,000 battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles registered in Florida. They actually now account for 7% of new car sales. So that's really important because if you understand the inflection points for the S-curve of adoption for new technology, this is where things start to go very significantly higher, and we will see a rise of as much as 25% of new car sales within the next 2 or 3 years. So this is where it gets exciting. Last year, OUC, if you can go back, please. Last year, OUC increased by 66%. And this represents about a little less than 2% of all registered light and medium duty. Now, I want to highlight the fact that Florida is the second in the nation. Florida is sixth in the nation and in terms of percent of registered vehicles. So we're up in the top 6. And you can see the growth last year being fairly significant. Those two graphs are showing the one that has the single line is showing you the adoption for the state of Florida. The other graph in the bottom is showing you some of the major dense areas like Tallahassee, Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville and their adoption curves. So go to the next slide, please. Oh, and one last thing about that. That last point in the bottom, there's a lot of press out there regarding sales slumping in the electric vehicle world. This is not true. EV sales had their best month ever in December of 2023. So I think we've actually bridged that curve. There's some bumps in the roads, no doubt about that, but EVs are selling. Please go ahead. Just to give you a brief idea of where the vehicles are, you'll notice the second from the top is out of Florida. That means that people have registered the vehicle, most likely commercial. They've registered out of the state, and we don't know where they're actually operating. So those vehicles are operating somewhere in Florida. A good percent of them, as you can see down at the bottom, are registered Hertz. They'll be distributed across the state. But I wanted to highlight here a group that was almost non-existent about a year ago is commercial vehicles. Now they represent about 10% of the total registrations. Go ahead and move forward. So just to wrap it up and tell you what does this mean for you. Number one, your customer base is particularly high income customers are driving EVs. And I can tell you as a 2 EV family, we make our decisions based on where I can charge. So where I eat, where I sleep, all are made because of that type of information. Your employees are driving EVs. At OUC, we've grown to 38 employee charging stations. And even though we're on a hybrid office visit, meaning that I only go in the office 1 to 2 times a week, every one of those stations are being used. And we believe that daytime charging will begin to make use of the cheaper solar generation. So these are key things for you to take away from this. And over to, I think it's
Ali.
Ellie. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Hi, everyone. If you are here, you are likely electric vehicle curious. So hopefully this section will help you answer some of your burning purchase questions. There are so many different online tools right now and resources to help you pick the best car for you, your needs, your budget, the size, that kind of thing. The first one is from Plug in America. You basically answer a series of questions about your driving habits, your daily needs, that kind of thing, the size of the car that you're looking for, and it kind of walks you through like a stepping stone tool to help you find the best electric vehicle for you and your family. The next one is Consumer Reports, who we all know and love from past purchases we may have made. This one shows you the best electric vehicle by consumer rating, so you can see what other people think about it. And then by budget category. And then the last link here, and we're going to be sharing all these links at the end, is the Alternative Fuels Data Center. This resource is from the United States Department of Energy, and it has information about finding, again, the right vehicle, and allows you to compare vehicles throughout the modeling tool. Next slide. All right, total cost of ownership. Contrary to popular belief, owning an electric vehicle is not just an environmentally conscious choice anymore. It is now a financially savvy one. This image is from a report published by the Atlas Public Policy. This is from March 2024. It breaks down the total cost of ownership, revealing substantial savings across the lifetime of the vehicle. This study analyzes a number of comparable ICE vehicles to electric vehicles. This one, in the case that we're looking at, is the Chevy Volt, which is the EV, to the Toyota Corolla, which is the ICE or internal combustion engine, which is the gas vehicle. Taxes and fees and insurances are all about the same in this bar chart. And the savings really shine through with the fuel, the maintenance, and the repairs. Fuel costs, this is another Consumer Reports study, show that drivers of gas-powered vehicles save on average about 60% less, or spend about 60% less each year compared to gas driving vehicles. The maintenance and repairs are shining out with the fewer moving parts. We'll probably cover this a little bit later, but gasoline vehicles have about 200 parts. Electric vehicles have about 20 parts. So there's so many less things that can go wrong in the engine and the battery components of the vehicles. Additionally, there are no oil changes, so you're not responsible for visiting the mechanic quarterly, and you don't have to deal with leaks and all of that. Next slide. To really summarize, electric vehicles are consistently outperforming traditional gas-powered vehicles in terms of cost effectiveness. There are a number of studies and economic data that backs up this, and we're all willing to share this information at the end. With transportation making up a major household expense for all of us, looking at the total picture of the lifetime of ownership of the vehicle is really important to see those cost savings. And I hope that this makes electric vehicle ownership even more appealing. Thanks.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Cohen with Switch, spelled SWTCH. We're an electric vehicle charging solutions provider really focused on multi-tenant properties. And Switch is a member of Drive Electric Florida. And I'm really happy to be on this webinar because I love EVs. I love my EV. And I'm happy to talk about some of the misconceptions about EVs. So I'm going to cover a couple topics, one of which is incentives. And so one thing to keep in mind is that there are a number of incentives, both federally as well as at the local level, that are available. If you go to the next slide, please. The Inflation Reduction Act includes 4 separate tax credits related to electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. And so over the next few slides, you'll see they're text heavy, but I'm going to try and summarize them in a way that you you get the highlights of what these are about. So if you go to the next slide, the first one is called the Clean Vehicle Tax Credit. It is a credit for a new EV. It goes up to $7,500, and to qualify, a few conditions must be met. One is that there's an income limit for the taxpayer. As you can see, it's $300,000 annual income for married couples filing jointly, $225,000 for heads of household, and $150,000 for all other taxpayers. There's also a condition related to the vehicle's price. The vehicle must have an MSRP under $55,000 for a passenger vehicle or $80,000 for an SUV or truck, basically gearing this tax credit not towards luxury vehicles, but to the bulk of vehicles that a typical household will purchase. And there are other conditions related to kind of domestic manufacture or assembly requirements for battery components and critical minerals, which you need to meet these conditions, or the vehicle needs to meet these conditions to be eligible for the full amount of the $7,500 tax credit. And I'm listening to myself speak, and already it sounds like tax stuff. And if it's confusing, don't worry about it. The website you can see on this slide, fueleconomy.gov, keeps an updated list of all models available that qualify for the credit. So you don't need to research into where is this battery made. You can just go to that website and it'll tell you, is this eligible or is it not, including based on model year. I also want to point out that a leased EV, if you want to lease, it also qualifies for the credit. For a vehicle that's leased, the credit goes to the dealer, which owns the vehicle, not to the person leasing the vehicle. But that said, many dealers will pass along the credit, the value of the credit, in the form of a discount on the lease. So this is the Clean Vehicle Tax Credit. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the new credits that's in the IRA is the Used Clean Vehicle Tax Credit, which is really important because used EVs are becoming a fast-growing and important market when it comes to EV adoption. The credit is designed similarly to the Clean Vehicle Credit, but with different thresholds. The price of the used EV must be $25,000 or less. The amount of the tax credit is up to 30% of the sale price, up to $4,000. And you can see here there are lower household income eligibility requirements. And a couple other conditions apply. For example, the vehicle must be sold by a registered dealer rather than an individual. And only the first resale of the vehicle qualifies for this used EV credit. In my personal opinion, I think it was designed this way just as a safeguard to prevent people from gaming the system and transferring vehicles multiple times to claim the credit. But important takeaway is that there is this credit available both for new and used EVs. If you go to the next slide, you'll see there's also a very generous EV credit for businesses called the Commercial Clean Vehicle Credit. For Class 1 or 2A vehicles, it's the same as the regular $7,500 Clean Vehicle Credit. But for Class 2B vehicles or higher, the credit is 30% of the price for if it's a full battery electric vehicle, up to $40,000. Both businesses and tax-exempt organizations qualify for this credit, and there's no limit to the number of credits the business or organization can claim. So these are the three credits in the Inflation Reduction Act geared towards the vehicles. If you go to the next slide, there's also a charging infrastructure tax credit, which similarly to the Clean Vehicle Credit, it is a little complicated, but at a high level, it's 30% of the cost up to $100,000 per item of property. Now, most chargers cost nowhere near that much. For a typical residential at-home charger, you can find one for a few $100s. For level 2 chargers, and I'm going to get into that are public facing, like at a shopping center or a workplace that require commercial grade equipment, the charger might cost $1,000 or $2,000 depending on what sort of functions you want in it. It's really only the higher powered fast chargers where a 30% limit might approach anywhere close to $100,000. There are some conditions that apply. As you can see on this slide, there's geographic eligibility. As you can also see, there is a handy mapping tool, so you don't need to research census tracts on your own, you can just go to that link or even just do a web search for 30C tax credit eligibility locator map, and it'll come up. There's some labor requirements associated with the installation in order to be eligible for the full 30% credit. And there are also some pretty cool tax credit options to take advantage of the tax credit, one of which is elective payment. And what this means is that states, local governments, tribal governments, rural electric cooperatives, other not-for-profit organizations that don't normally pay taxes, they can still elect to receive the full value of the tax credit as a direct payment, which is especially helpful, for example, for a town that doesn't pay taxes, but is still interested in deploying charging infrastructure and still wants to take advantage of this incentive. There's also a transferability provision. So entities that don't qualify for elective payment can still choose to monetize the value of the tax credit by selling it. So this could be helpful, for example, if you're a for-profit business, but you don't have a lot of tax liability yourself, you can still monetize it and sell the value of this tax credit. So I know that's a lot of information. There's the IRS has plenty of guidance online, and I'm happy to answer questions as best I can in the Q&A, although I am not a tax attorney. So in addition to this federal tax credit, there are also a number of local charger incentives within Florida, from Jacksonville Electric down to FPL in Miami and lots of places in between. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that all of these entities on this slide offer some form of rebate or direct financial incentive for EV charging stations. These are not the only local incentives in Florida. Tampa Electric, for example, offers special discounts when charging your EV at night or on the weekend, as do other utilities. So my encouragement is really to check with your local electric utility or local government and see what may be available. So as you can see through these slides, there are plenty of federal incentives as well as in-state incentives, both for the vehicles and the charging. And so speaking of which, let's get into the charging for a bit. So if you've never driven an EV, you may be wondering about these strange looking plugs they use to charge. And if you've looked closely, you may have noticed that the plugs come in different configurations. So how do you know what charger you can charge at, what doesn't work for your car, etc.? So fortunately, there is an industry standard. The technical name is J1772, which is the name assigned to the standard by the Society for Automotive Engineers, or SAE, which developed it. So pretty much every EV on the road in North America can charge with the standard J1772 plug, which is the port that most EVs sold today are equipped with. Teslas are a different story. They have their own plug, which Tesla named a bit boldly as the North American Charging Standard, or NACS, or NACS. Teslas have their own network of NACS-equipped chargers, but if you drive a Tesla, you can also charge at a normal J1772 plug just by sticking on a small adapter. So about the charging plugs, like any new technology, it sometimes takes a few years for the market to kind of coalesce around one common standard, and EV charging is no different. In 2023, there was a major development when Tesla made its NACS plug available to be used as a plug by non-Tesla vehicles. So the SAE, the Society for Automotive Engineers, which developed the J1772 standard I mentioned, led the development of a new J3400 standard based on the NACS plug. And I realize I'm giving you lots of acronyms and numbers. The bottom line is that many automakers and charging providers have already announced that they are going to be using this Tesla-based J3400 plug as their standard moving forward. So it may still take a few years of needing to use an adapter here or there, depending on which plug is native to your vehicle. But in my opinion, the J3400, the Tesla NACS plug, will quickly become the industry standard across North America. So that's about the plugs, but what about the charging speeds and the power levels? If you stay on that one slide, I'm just going to cover this briefly. The main point is that whatever your charging needs are, there's a different power level to meet those needs. Level 1, you can see on the left column there, delivers the power from a standard wall outlet. It can recharge roughly at a rate of 4 to 5 miles of range per hour. This works great for drivers with a short commute who may only drive 40 or 50 miles in a day. Level 2 requires a 240 volt outlet, which is the same as a standard electric clothes dryer. And it can recharge a battery at around 25 miles of range per hour. So if your car is parked at a charger overnight, or if you're parked at a charger while you're at work, a level 2 charger can generally recharge your battery around 200 miles of range over 8 hours. Level 3 requires higher power, and it's often used for road trips or on-the-go charging when you want to get a lot of power delivered in a short amount of time. Level 3 charging can vary a lot in terms of the power level, anywhere from 50 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts and even higher. But how quickly you can charge your vehicle depends both on the charger's power level as well as your vehicle's battery, because different vehicle models can receive power at different levels. So for a lot of passenger cars on the road today, even if they're plugged into a 350 kilowatt ultra-fast charger, they may still only be receiving the charge at 100 or 150 kilowatts, and Ali will cover some battery facts later. So speaking of road trips, you're on the road, you're stopping at a fast charger. How reliable are chargers? So I do want to spend a minute, if you go to the next slide, to discuss charging reliability, because I've seen a lot of headlines about it recently, and I want to acknowledge that these first few years of EV charging have provided the industry with some lessons learned. A really important one is the value of having a plan and a budget for ongoing operations and maintenance. It's not enough to install and energize a charger, especially one that's available to the public. Things happen. The internet connection might need to be reset, a part might need to be replaced. Driver error sometimes plays a role. But in my view, the stories and headlines about unreliable chargers are going to become a thing of the past pretty quickly, because this very bureaucratic, governmental looking document on this screen is a big reason for it. In early 2023, the federal government published the National EV Infrastructure, or NEVI, standards, which have a lot of requirements associated with any federally funded chargers. The important one here being that they maintain a minimum of 97% uptime. The bipartisan infrastructure law included billions of dollars for charging infrastructure, all of which must meet these NEVI standards. So even though plenty of chargers are continuing to be deployed without any federal dollars, as a practical matter, in my view, these NEVI standards have become like a de facto industry standard, because pretty much all the major charging providers are positioning themselves, their supply chain, their products, their services, to be able to comply with and exceed this minimum uptime requirement. So stories about inoperable or unreliable chargers, I think, will become a thing of the past. So you're on the road, you plug into a charger. How far can you actually drive before you need to charge again in the first place? So if you go to the next slide, over the past decade, as the industry has matured and as manufacturing has scaled up and battery prices have gone down and battery technology has improved, EV ranges have increased substantially. When EVs were first introduced back in 2011, mass market EVs, vehicle ranges spanned between about 63 miles to 94 miles per charge. And I've talked with a number of people who said, yeah, I'm not going to get an EV. I remember looking into it a few years ago, and they just didn't have a very big range. Well, the technology has matured really quickly, and today it's a much different story. This chart from the US Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office shows that in model year 2023, the highest top range for an EV was 516 miles on a single charge. That's for the Lucid Air. while the median range for all EV models rose to a new high median range of 270 miles per electric vehicle. And if you go to the next slide, I want to reiterate what Ali mentioned earlier. There are a number of helpful resources available online to help you compare EVs, to help you comparison shop. This resource on this screen is put forth by UC Davis. It's an EV Explorer, and it can help you identify the right EVs based on your budget and your driving needs. And that concludes my presentation, I think. I'll turn it back over to you, Brooke.
So this is Pete Westlake, and they've asked the one with Canadian heritage to go ahead and talk about cold weather. As you can see, I love this picture that Josh was able to find. Apparently in 1899, there was a huge snowball fight that happened on the steps of the Capitol. And I think he said it got down to below zero on that particular day. We haven't seen that, and this isn't quite a thing in the state of Florida, but I am here to tell you that regardless of the recent the recent stories that have been in the paper in Buffalo, where people weren't able to get their vehicles charged and so forth, it is happening. Norway has 80% of new cars in Norway are electric, and I can guarantee you that it's very cold in Norway, and they do not have the issues. You have to get used to the technology. In particular, things like Tesla, it does a preconditioning that warms up the battery so that it accepts the charge appropriately. You don't want to let your vehicle get below a certain threshold to make sure that you're not on your last legs getting to a charging station. So cold weather charging is going to happen. So if you do take a trip north, or if Tallahassee gets into the freezing zone again, this is not going to be an issue for you. If you could move to the next slide for me. There's a lot of misinformation on the market about, are EVs really efficient, and are they really going to provide us with the clean air that they promise, and that's just not true. So zero emission vehicles are by far much more clean than the equivalent ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine. So you see the two graphs on the left-hand side. The bottom, these represent two different manufacturing approaches for battery electric vehicle. The low end for the battery case, and the high end for minerals in the middle case there. The bottom line, the blue, is the manufacturing of the shell, the actual vehicle itself. And you can see that's pretty comparable across all of the vehicle types. The green section in the left two columns represent the battery mining and minerals, all the things that go into manufacturing the battery. And that adds that small layer. Now comes the fun part. The orange on the left side is the actual emissions that are recorded in the manufacture of electricity. So it's what the utilities actually provide or are emitting. And the yellow is what the gas vehicle is emitting. And you can see that we're talking less than 50% of the total lifetime greenhouse gas emissions and particulates are emitted with battery electric vehicles, even though you consider in all the components, the mining, the manufacturing, the smelting, all the things that go into this. It's still at a 50% level. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a second here, but this gets even better as the grid starts to move to a decarbonization goal. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So you got to ask yourself, how does Florida compare? Well, we actually do better than the average state. So for Florida on the left-hand side, this tells you the emissions, annual emissions per vehicle. On the left for the all electric, that's all green. Next to it is the plug-in hybrid, and again, the green portion is the electric portion of the vehicle. The gray is the gas portion of the vehicle. Then you have the hybrid, which is all gas driven, so there's no electricity that's actually produced, but it is a more efficient vehicle. And then there's the gasoline that's on the far right. So when you look at Florida, our fuel mix for utility manufacturing is really a lot better than the state average across the United States. That's what's showing on the right-hand side. So if you can move to the next slide. I'm going to give you a little bit more information now. Vehicles last 8 to 20 years. And in fact, what's going to happen, because there's less parts, as you heard earlier, to wear out and things that will wear out in an electric vehicle, they actually estimate that they will last even longer yet. The only thing that's going to impair them is fatal accidents and things like that. So you'll see on average vehicles moving to 300,000 miles. You'll wear the seats out before you wear out the vehicle. So as the grid gets greener, so does electric transportation. So there's no reason to stop and not buy an electric vehicle now. It already operates at 50% less. But as the utilities have plans for decarbonization by 2050, as we move to a greener grid, so does transportation. So we get the double benefit of having both the transportation and the utilities moving towards a decarbonized future. And the last thing that I want to say is that, and I rode my bike to work for quite a while, and I can tell you the most annoying thing about the bikes, besides the cars hitting you, is the tailpipe emissions. They're right there where we live. They're right there where we breathe. It's something you're inhaling completely. Energy generation is centralized and minimized. We invest an awful lot of money into minimizing the types of things that go into our atmosphere. So I think you could rest assured that by moving to electric, you are actually doing a good thing for the environment. And I think that's it for me. I think I'm gonna turn it over to Ali.
All right, so I'm back. So I'm going to talk about batteries. Some of the most frequent questions I think that we see are around batteries, the electric vehicle batteries. Are they recyclable? How long do they last? How environmentally friendly are they? Is this all just a greenwashing ploy from environmentalists? So I am happy to dig in. A study from the International Council on Clean Transportation found that over the entire life cycle of an electric vehicle, the climate impact of an EV is approximately 1/3 that of a combustion engine vehicle. Again, we're talking life cycle. So that's extracting the raw materials, manufacturing the vehicle and the battery, driving, and usage. A common misconception is that manufacturing the vehicle is going to be the most climate intense, but it's actually the day-to-day usage that is the most burdensome on the environment. So day-to-day usage for a gasoline vehicle, you're driving, say a gallon of gas is used to get to and from work. That's maybe 1 gallon. That translates to 20 pounds of CO2 that will then be going into the atmosphere for 300 to 1,000 years. So yes, manufacturing is a big piece, and mining for the batteries for EVs is very front and heavy on the environment, but overall the lifetime usage of the EV versus the internal combustion engine is far better for the environment. Next slide. Mining. So for our current EV battery needs, the mining practices do have some serious downsides to the environments and the workers involved. I want to note that the Environmental Defense Fund, where I work, as well as a number of other environmental advocacy organizations, are working diligently at the federal and international level to address these issues and push for more sustainable mining practices. Now, taking a step back, if we consider the bigger picture, the life cycle, all of that, while it's true that EVs require more mining during production than traditional gas cars, once they're built, we're done with the mining phase. We're done. So I say this because, on the other hand, gasoline vehicles feed off of mining. They require mining daily for the fossil fuels that fuel and power them. So yes. And last, manufacturers are moving away from cobalt-based batteries, which is an issue. As far as mining goes, cobalt is one of the most human environmentally detriment types of mining. So seeing large manufacturers, Cadillac, Ford, Rivian, Tesla, Volkswagen, moving away from those traditional types of batteries and exchanging them for LFP batteries, which is lithium iron phosphate, is a great step in the right direction. And we're urging and working at the federal and private sector level to continue to see this trend. I know that they're also working on using less of the materials to make the vehicle work and last longer and do all of the things, but just by using less of the mined material. So that's another great step in the right direction. So to wrap up, we must prioritize responsible practices in minings as needed for EVs, and we do still need very strong monitoring for human rights and overseas mining industry. And hopefully, all of those things combined will be bringing the local jobs and the manufacturing back to the US. Okay, next slide. So are batteries recyclable? Yes, they are. As with any recycled material, or as with any material, really, the first life is to reuse, refurbish. We see that with our cell phones. We see that with the plastics and things like that. It's to get the most life out of it. So a lot of times you're seeing these batteries, maybe like he said earlier, you'll wear out the seats before you'll wear out the car. And sometimes we're seeing that with the batteries where they're like, oh, the vehicle is done, but we will take that battery and we'll use it for battery backup, for storage, for solar power, that kind of thing, still continuing to use that battery. But when the battery is no longer able to be used in that way, then it is time to recycle it. You smelt it down, you shred it, you separate it. And we're seeing that they're able to recover 95 to 98% of the minerals within those batteries and then turn that into another battery from within. There's actually a new organization or company, South Carolina-based facility called Redwood Materials that I think just broke ground in January. And we are anticipating seeing more of these types of recycling plants pop up. This Redwood Materials is primarily looking at the batteries, extracting that 95 to 98% of the materials in a spent battery to then turn into a new battery. So the market demand is very high for these materials and minerals. And obviously recycling completely relies on, recycling reduces the need for future mining, which is great. The next slide. Oops, actually, can you go back one more? How long do they last is another question. The average lifetime mileage of a gas vehicle is about 133,000 miles. This was, we have the data and we'll share those. While experts estimate, again, the average EV battery will last around 200 miles, and then some manufacturers are promising much, much more than that in the coming years. Because I know that the batteries and the life cycle is a thing that people are very much looking at. Okay, next slide. Safety. So this is kind of the standard safety stuff. Electric vehicles offer several advantages over internal combustion engine vehicles. EVs have a simpler mechanical design with fewer moving parts, like we mentioned earlier. Secondly, the placement of the heavy batteries in electric vehicles typically result in a lower center of gravity, which enhances the stability of the vehicle, less rollovers, that kind of thing. EVs are often featuring advanced driver assistance programs, autonomous driving technologies, that kind of thing that can help prevent both collisions and then mitigate the severity of the collision in case you are in one. And then finally, EVs produce zero tailpipe emissions, so contributing to improved air quality and public health and safety at the local level. The Institute for Highway Safety, IIHS, gives electric vehicles a better overall rating in regards to vehicle safety. So by design, electric vehicles are the safer choice to gasoline vehicles. Okay, next slide. Kind of odds and ends, you know, here in Florida, I know there was a huge conversation last year and the year before that during Hurricane Ian, where we're seeing a lot of vehicle fires and things like that. So we're going to get into that, but electric vehicles and fire safety has been a prominent subject of discussion here in Florida, surrounded by a lot of myths and kind of exaggerated misconceptions. But luckily, we've had a couple of third-party surveyors and agencies look into this. The Highway Loss Data Institute found that electric vehicles actually had a 26% lower frequency of non-crash fires compared to gasoline vehicles. Gasoline vehicles actually also have a much higher rate of recall for fire issues. There was also a paper published by an auto insurance agency that used transportation statistics and data from the National Transportation Safety Board. They found that for every 100,000 vehicles sold, gas vehicles sold, they were seeing 1,500 fires per sale. And then for every 100,000 vehicles sold that was electric, they were seeing 25. So you're comparing 1,500 out of every 100,000 to 25 out of every 100,000. So EVs were less likely to have a fire or thermal event. And then lastly, on the same vein of safety, with all new technologies, training, education, resources are absolutely needed for our first responders so that they are able to assist in the case of any vehicle, especially an electric vehicle, battery issue, emergency. Organizations like the National Fire Protection Association are providing training, robust training around the country, specifically focused on electric vehicle safety. Electric vehicle manufacturers are working in parts with our first responders to create and provide emergency response guidelines for each of their vehicles, tailored specifically. And then they're working with emergency responders to make sure that they have all the necessary resources. And then new innovation. You know, we're no longer fighting the same fires that we were fighting in the past. So we need new technologies to work with. This is a photo from a few months ago. A team of Arizona firefighters were testing out, it's a graphite fire smothering blanket that they were using for electric vehicles. I don't believe that much water was needed in this case to put this electric battery fire out. So just kind of summarize and wrap it up, really with any new innovation, it's crucial to update our emergency response strategies and provide adequate training for all responders. But as a whole, electric vehicles are faring very well as far as safety goes. So thank you.
Okay, thank you to all of our panelists. Please feel free if you have any questions to enter them into the chat box. It looks like we've got just under 15 minutes or so to address some questions. So I will start in the order that I receive questions. And like I said, please feel free to add some more in if you think of any. So the first question we have is, how are the NEVI federal standards enforced?
So I can take a first cut at that. The NEVI standards are the umbrella for those are if you are accepting federal funding, that's when these the NEVI standards come into place. And if you are accepting that grant funding from NEVI or federal funding, then you are required to report on a periodic basis. At a minimum yearly, I think it might actually be quarterly. And I believe that there are some provisions for clawback if you're not meeting standard.
Yeah, and I would just add to that depending on the federal funding, the state may also have a role. So with the NEVI program itself, the National EV Infrastructure Formula Program, which is mostly focused on highway public fast charging, those funds flow from the U.S. Federal Highway Administration to FDOT and other state departments of transportation. And so the state has a role in not just dispersing the funds and ensuring that there's a good deployment plan, but also making sure that those deployments comply with the NEVI standards.
Okay, our next question is, can someone talk about the differences between dumb chargers and network chargers, OCPP hardware and software, and how this affects drivers?
Sure, I'm happy to take a first crack at that. So this question gets at two topics: managed charging as well as communication standards or interoperability. So let me just take a couple minutes to respond to each one separately. So on the managed charging piece, the question asked dumb versus smart. Another way to think about it is the charger basically just a dispenser of electricity, or is there some firmware embedded in it that enables someone to manage how it's charged? One way to think about it is if you think about a thermostat on the wall, how some of the kind of basic thermostats, and certainly the older generation thermostats going back a couple decades, were you could call them dumb thermostats, where you set the temperature and then that's what it keeps the temperature at. More modern thermostats, as we know, are part of the Internet of Things, and they have firmware embedded in them that enable control with usually cloud-based platforms. You can control it from your laptop, control it from your app on your phone. And so that's a similar analogy for EV charging. From Switch's perspective, there's a whole lot of value to be had by managing charging intelligently. One aspect is what I mentioned earlier on when I was kind of running through some of the local Florida utilities that offered incentives, and I mentioned Tampa Electric has special electricity rates depending on when you charge your EV. Plenty of other utilities have these time of use rates. So if you charge your EV at night or on the weekends, you can take advantage of much cheaper electricity rates. Managed charging enables that. You can basically set it and forget it if you're the driver, and you can even optimize the charging depending on what charging platform you use to make sure that you have your battery ready to go at whatever time you want to leave. And where managed charging really provides value is in a context where you're charging multiple vehicles at the same property. And so you really need to manage the electrical demand that those vehicles have, not just individually, but within the overall constraints of a property. So I'll just pause there, other than to say that a smart charger, a network charger, is more pricey upfront than a dumb charger, but the value it provides way more than pays for itself, in my view. And Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Some of the simplest way to think about it is you can't charge, charge money for a charge unless the charger is networked. So the basic functionality of the charger must be networked to actually engage a third-party app to be able to collect money for the charge. The second thing is that you are unable to query the charger to see if it's operational, and that's one of the main things from a maintenance perspective, is to understand whether the charging station is operational. So those two things alone makes it fairly important to consider the network portion. The OCPP compliance is really just a standard. When you get to compliance, then you start to break down whether your charging application can communicate with the charger itself. So the more compliant both the hardware and the software is, the better off you are, because you can start to have a single application which will take you to multiple chargers no matter what brand it is.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, how long do EV chargers last? And how can they be calculated as a fixture to the property for commercial brokers who are looking to install public EV charging to monetize them in the meantime and also include them in the sale of the property?
So I'm not sure about the second part, but let me just take the first part if you don't mind. There's really two answers to this. First, make ready. That's getting power from the primary all the way down to the that's probably 2/3 of the actual cost, and that will last 20 years. The actual charger itself, the higher end quality can last as much as 10. So that'll give you an idea of asset life.
Okay, thank you. How do states and feds expect to collect highway taxes from EV owners?
I can help with that one. So if you guys were involved in this past legislative session period, we did have an electric vehicle user fee bill on the table. Drive Electric Florida and as well as Environmental Defense Fund, we're all for electric vehicles paying their fair share to use the roads. That's only fair. Trying to figure out what that number is something that we've been coordinating, working with the state on. Many states, I think there's about 30 states, already have a flat fee already established. So the electric vehicle owner, when they register their vehicle, they pay anywhere from $50 up to $250 for the year for that vehicle to be using the roads. Some of those fees, a portion of those fees in a number of southern states are using, say the fee is $200 to register your electric vehicle annually. $150 will go to the road builders, and then $50 will help kind of grow the EV infrastructure so that they're ready for emergency response and evacuations and things like that. Again, Florida is still kind of trying to figure out what their number is. Some other states, I believe Oregon and I think Alabama and Georgia are doing away with the flat fee. They did it for a while. That wasn't kind of their favorite thing. In fairness, it's not a great number. It would not account for people traveling through your state. When we get the snowbirds and the tourists coming down, they wouldn't have paid that flat fee and they would still be using our roads. So it's not comparable to a gas tax at the pump. So what other states, Oregon and a few other southern states are doing is they're now adding a tax or fee at the point of sale when you're charging your vehicle, but it's at a public station. So again, that doesn't really do the same thing and get the same influx of money to the national federal. So basically the short answer is a lot of people are really working on this. I know the governor's office is looking into this. The bill that we have seen in the past was for $200 for users, electric vehicle drivers in the state of Florida. That did not pass. It came up 2 years in the House and Senate, did not pass for the state. And so I know they're back at the drawing board now trying to figure out, is it something behind the meter? Is it something in front of the meter? Is it tied in with our utilities? Is it a bunch of different ideas all together to kind of pay for the road use? So, and that's at the state level. But again, a lot of other states are doing different things. Florida's still figuring this out. And then at the federal level, I know that last year they were discussing, a charge, an extra fee at the point of purchase. That was getting kicked around as well, because everybody should be paying for the roads that they're using. And so we're still kind of wait and see, and then happily working on, whatever kind of movement we can get at the state level to make sure that EVs are paying.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. The next one is, can you elaborate on resale value of EVs versus gas engine vehicles? And then what about the insurance cost of a secondhand EV?
So I'm not sure that I can answer the whole thing, but I think the whole market is a little bit unstable, and here's why. the price of a new EV is dropping on an annual basis. So one of the reasons that Hertz had an issue with their purchase of Tesla was that they purchased, and then Tesla almost immediately dropped the price, which drops the residual value of the vehicle. So there are some stabilization issues that will continue to happen for electric vehicles until the market flattens out and they've eked out all the operational improvements. I think that's as far as I go. I'm not sure about insurance. I'm not sure if anyone else on the panel has experienced on insurance.
I'm not, but Pete, when you answered the previous question about how long the infrastructure and the charger lasts, you froze up just a bit. I think it would be helpful if you just kind of repeated it a bit.
Sure. So we look at it in two positions. So 2/3 of the cost goes to your infrastructure make ready, meaning getting power to the pad, and that'll last 20 plus years, just like any other power infrastructure that goes along. The last piece of it is installing the actual pedestal or the wall mount. And that piece of it, we budget 5 to 7 years, depending on the use of the actual equipment. Some of the higher end equipment can last up to 10 years. So for instance, the high-speed hubs and things like that are made to last much longer than a home variety. But you can count on replacing anywhere from 5 to 7 years.
Thanks.
Okay, well, we are approaching the hour, so I want to thank Pete, Josh, and Ali for being our panelists today. And as I mentioned earlier, you all will be receiving a follow-up email from us with resources and a fact sheet for today's webinar, along with the recording, so that you're able to share that with your colleagues as well. And another thing, if you or your organization are interested in joining Drive Electric Florida, please visit our website, which is driveelectricflorida.org. Myself and our 3 panelists today are all members of Drive Electric Florida, and a couple of us are on the board as well. And we welcome your membership and your participation in our organization. You will be also, if you could, there it is. There's also a survey that we would love for you to take. We'll make sure we send this link out as well, but there's a QR code on your screen now if you would like to participate in that survey. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. And thank you again so much for joining us. Please be on the lookout for future webinars. I know we're planning to do some more this year on some other subject matter, so we look forward to your future participation, and we hope you have a great day, and thanks again for joining us today.